A deadly plague came with dark winds out of the east. The king and all his children died, and great numbers of the people of Gondor, especially those that lived in Osgiliath. Then for weariness and fewness of men, the watch on the borders of Mordor ceased, and the fortresses that guarded the passes were unmanned. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today's video will be darker than most of my other ones, but it is an important one, for it will explain a great deal of how the West suffered and changed during the mid-Third Age, and why the lands of men became as they were before and during the Lord of the Rings. I make this video with all due respect with what our world has just gone through, and wanted to wait until this community deemed it appropriate to make this video, for it is an important one in understanding Tolkien's world during the Third Age. For further helpful information on the Great Plague of Middle-earth, and what happened during it, please check out the articles and videos in the description and cards. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. It means a lot. Let's begin our tale. The story of the Great Plague, also called the Dark Plague, begins in 1635 of the Third Age. This pestilence first arose in the east, and was born by dark winds, coming to Rhovanion and its people first, if not the people of the east and south first. Concerning the origin of this plague, surely Sauron, while dormant, still played some part in its manifestation, for fell winds from the east bore the plague, the shadow in Mirkwood deepened during the plague's devastation in Middle-earth, and Mordor was more or less deserted by the men of Gondor because of it, with all of these things benefiting Sauron. In The Lord of the Rings Online, the game explores this idea more, having one of Sauron's servants, Lyrith the Stained, create the plague as a blight upon the West. While Lyrith is not canon, there is more precedent within Tolkien's works that the Dark Lord played a part in creating and spreading this plague, for during 469 of the First Age, Morgoth had crafted a plague of his own, called the Evil Breath, that devastated the lands of the north that bordered Anfauglith. This plague would sicken Turin to Rambar and even slay his sister Erwin. With all of this context in mind, I find it doubtless that Sauron took another trick of his master Morgoth, and played some part in making this plague to devastate his enemies. And indeed, it did just that. Again, in the winter of 1635, the plague spread into Rhovanion and slew many of its folk, for though they had no great cities, men and their horses were forced to take shelter in their houses and stables of not high quality, and their skills in healing and medicine were little. It slew more than half of the folk of Rhovanion by its end in the north. Merhwini, the chieftain of the people, would afterwards lead his folk into the far north of Rhovanion to start anew. But the plague did not spread there alone. It came to Gondor in 1636 on dark winds from the east, and the king Telemnar and all of his children were slain, as were a great number of people in Gondor, especially in Osgiliath and other large cities. Torondor, nephew of the king, would succeed the kingship, but even the White Tree of Gondor, planted in the city of Menas Anor by Isildur in memory of his brother Anarion, would die during this dark plague. A new sapling would be planted by Torondor after the pestilence passed, but much would change in Gondor because of this terrible event that affected its people and even its heraldry. Osgiliath and Ithilien, and likely even Menas Ithil, would be far more depopulated after this, and the king's seat would be removed from Osgiliath to Menas Anor. The watch upon Mordor, although it had begun to wane during and before the Kinstrife, the Gondorian Civil War, was ended, for Gondor had not the men nor strength to continue the watch upon Sauron's realm of old. It was a dark time in Gondor, and even in its northern reaches of Calenarthon, not yet called Rohan. For though the Dunlandings there and in Dunland and beyond suffered less than other folk, being more isolated, the settlers that were descended from Númenor were lessened there, and Orthanc itself was deserted. It was locked, and its keys removed to Menas Anor, for there were not enough men to keep that fortress either. And so the plague continued to spread north into Eriador, coming into the southern reaches of the petty kingdom of Cardolan. Most of the people of Cardolan were slain by the plague, especially in Menhiriath. The outposts of the south, like Tharbad, felt these effects as well, and were surely abandoned by the devastation of its guards. Angmar, who yet warred with Arnor at this time, would afterwards use this opportunity to send fell spirits into the Barrow-downs, the capital of Cardolan. Although Cardolan's sister petty kingdom, Arthedain, further to the north, would be little affected by the plague, the same cannot be said of the hobbits in the Shire. This plague would devastate many of them as well, but they would survive and prosper afterwards. By 1637, it seemed the plague had truly run its course, though its effects would be felt throughout the rest of the age. Even in the east and south, it seems the enemies of Gondor and men had been greatly injured by this plague as well, for they did not seize the chance to conquer Gondor in its weakened state. To what extent these men felt the effects of the plague, I am unsure, but it seems that they were devastated nonetheless. It's not clear what ended the plague, if anything besides time and its spread. In The Lord of the Rings Online, it was Ethelas that helped end it, at least in Gondor. I cannot be sure, as it seems the plague simply ran its course. Perhaps Ethelas or some sort of elvish or wizardly intervention helped indeed, for it seems this plague did not much affect elves, dwarves, or wizards. Concerning why this plague didn't hurt elves, dwarves, or wizards, I am unsure. Perhaps they had innate qualities about them that made them resilient against it, or perhaps the plague was tailored more for men and hobbits, who had weaker immune systems. I am unsure. Also, concerning the exact number of deaths from the plague, I can't say for sure. It likely either numbered in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, for a few kingdoms of men were nearly wiped out solely from this plague. Even so, this was an undisputed victory for Sauron and his servants, besides his thralls among men who suffered as well. For Sauron could more easily reside in Mirkwood without as much fear of nearby men, the Witch King made quick work of Cardolan, one of the last surviving allies of Arthedain during his war with them, and Mordor would be made further ready for Sauron's eventual return there, as Gondor was greatly weakened. What's more is that Eriador, although it was connected to the south by the Great North-South Road, and had wide and fertile lands, was greatly unpopulated, and even through to the end of the Third Age and the beginning of the Fourth, not many were the folk who came to dwell between Enedwaith all the way to Bree. Of course, the destruction of Arnor would also cause the great depopulation of men in the north, made all the easier by this plague, making the small town of Bree and its surrounding villages the only real dwellings of common men of Middle-earth and Eriador. The Great Plague truly had a lasting effect on the peoples of Middle-earth during the Third Age, and it is good for the free peoples that it eventually found its end, just as all evil things must. Now let me turn the question to you all. What do you think, if anything, ended the Great Plague? And what were other side effects from it that would affect the rest of the history of Middle-earth from that point in the Third Age onward? And so we come to the end of our tale about what happened during the Great Plague of Middle-earth. From this tale we see that we must rejoice in our lives and family and friends in times of health, and not take such times for granted. In times of sorrow and illness, we must do what we can to take care of each other, so that we might find those times of health and peace once more. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all found this video to be interesting and telling about the state of Middle-earth in the Mid-Third Age. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts, questions, additions, and corrections on what happened during the Great Plague? Let me know in the comments below. The story is truly important, for it tells of how deep and nuanced the evils of Sauron could truly be. I want to shout out our Valar tier patrons: Adrian De La Torre, Chris Order, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putnam, Mark Kralik, Blair Scout, Tobias Golder, Merton, John Hume, Tom Bombadil, Richie93, Jennifer Wood, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Quantum Catalyst, Elizabeth Calvert, and Maz Gibbs, and Ben Gardner. Thank you all so much, and thank you to all of our patrons. It really means a lot. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today. I'll see you all again next week with a video on the White Trees of Middle-earth, to contrast this video's theme of despair and pestilence with one of hope and renewal. Everyone, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my great friends.